And so we spoke about Nehemiah and how it was time for Judah to rise up and build. And we saw that in Ecclesiastes there is a time to everything under the sun. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to break down and a time to build up. And we did have a look at the time to break down, and I want to just, this part is definitely the time to start building up. But I do acknowledge that we're not all in that season. Collectively at a church, we are. The church's job is to go forward. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church of God. So as a collective, as a church, our assignment is always to build. But sometimes in our lives, things get broken and destroyed. And God sits with us in that brokenness, as he did with Judah. And for 70 years, they sat in their brokenness and in their exile and captivity. But there was a time to get up and go and be free. And so I don't want to rush us all. I don't know where you are in your life, because I know I was in my season of breaking down for a period of years, if I'm honest and if I look back. And God did such an important work in that time of breaking down. And you know, please Jesus, can we start building? Can we start building? And you know, that is always his will. It's always his will. And so we see in Nehemiah 2 and 2:18, when he says to Israel, to Judah, let us rise up and build. Let us rise up and build. And that's the cry today, is let us rise up and build. And we saw that issue of us rising up. And we saw that one of the obstacles in Judah's way of building, and it's rebuilding actually, because it was destroyed, was the fact that they were not together. And that's what we spoke about, is that the rubble was overwhelming to them, and they just couldn't quite bring themselves to start the process. And we said that rubble is simply stones on their own. And put together, they become a wall of defense. And what we saw, there were 3 phases of their rebuilding. The first phase was they came back from exile and they built their houses, their homes. For you and I, they rebuilt their lives, really, their families. The second phase was the temple of God. They had to be reminded, okay guys, enough now, let's start on the temple. And that's God restoring their spirit, and perhaps our spirit, and reviving us. When we're dead in our transgressions, God makes us alive with Christ. But the story of Nehemiah comes in when the third part of the rebuild, of the build, was not completed. And that's in the defenses, the walls around Jerusalem. And because the walls were in disarray, they were broken down and the gates were burnt. Because of that, the enemy had access, free access to oppress them. And we said that for you and I, the similarity there is sometimes we've got our lives going, we're born again, spirit-filled, but our defenses are down and we can't understand why we're not quite getting ahead. And what they found is there were gaps in the wall that had to be repaired, and the gates had to be rebuilt. And Nehemiah was the man, and he came with permission from the king of Persia, who at that time was the king of the world. And he gave him a letter of authority saying, you go ahead and you can go and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. He gave him access to material, he gave him protection, and so on and so forth. So the story of Nehemiah is really a fantastic story. And today, so the first opposition, they came to that conclusion, let us rise up and rebuild. But the first obstacle in their way was the fact of the rubble. And the strategy to overcome that was to come together. And that was last week. This week, we're going to talk about the second obstacle in their way. And the second obstacle in their way was opposition. Opposition against the rebuild. And that's what everything's going to be about today, is how opposition comes. We're going to look at the enemy's strategy of opposition. And the very first thing we really need to talk about the opposition is we first need to talk about the man Nehemiah. The man Nehemiah. And in Nehemiah 2:10, It says, but when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, now Sanballat, and so I've said they, because we're going to hear their names all the time, and we'll just say they are the enemy. Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite were Judah's enemies. They weren't living right there, but they were surrounding them. So when they heard that Nehemiah was coming, it displeased them greatly that someone, the King James version says it beautifully because it literally translates that word, that a man, and because it's actually the beautiful word Adam, that a man had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. The enemies of Israel were angry that a man had come to seek their welfare. Isn't that incredible? It reminds me of our enemy, the serpent, who gets angry. He's happy when we're destroyed, when we're lying in the dirt, when we're rubble, very happy. But he gets angry when we start picking ourselves up and start coming together and rebuild. And so in a way, this story of Nehemiah he's like a type of Christ. And it reminds me of Luke 19 and verse 10, where Jesus himself says, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save that having been lost. In other words, that was destroyed. That word lost is actually like the same as apolumi, which means to be destroyed. That which has been destroyed, the Son of Man has come to save. That which has been burnt down, killed, perished, the Son of Man has come. And so we see that Nehemiah becomes a type of Christ who has been sent by the King of heaven and earth. Nehemiah was sent by the king of Persia, the ruler of the world at the time, of the civilized world, the known world. Jesus has come from the King of heaven to seek and to save that which is lost. So we see the hope in the message of Nehemiah, to know that you and I have not been left in our disgrace and in our destruction, but somebody has come to seek your welfare. Amen. Don't give up hope. Amen. And so when we see the story, we're going to remember that Nehemiah is almost like a type of Christ. And so that's the opposition. The enemy gets angry when we come to Christ. We really need to know that. And that's why you start appearing on his radar. And so I'm going to look at exposing some of the enemy's opposition by finding lessons in the book of Nehemiah and seeing how he plotted against the people of Israel. And we're going to see, does that actually apply to how he works in our lives today? And I know that in my life, it's, this last year has been a year of beginning to rebuild a lot. I felt that in my spirit. I felt that in my life. It's like God released me to start rebuilding. And opposition has come. It hasn't been a happily ever after. We need to I must remind my daughter, we must throw the nursery rhymes away for the school, the fairy tales. There ain't no happily ever after until Jesus comes. In the meantime, there's work to be done. There's building that needs to take place. And I renovated my home this year. I built on a little scullery. And let me tell you, a rebuild is painful. There's dust, there's noise. Things have to be removed before new things can be put in. And it's actually, it always comes, so you have this amazing plan and you're excited because you can envisage the end of it and you think, woohoo, I'm going to have a scullery, people. I'm happy. I know the men are probably thinking, who cares? But the women, listen, this was a very exciting thing for me. But at some point in the build, I thought, have I lost my mind? Why have I done this to myself? I just didn't have what I thought was going to take 3 weeks, took almost 2 months. And I thought, why did I do? I was angry. I was literally angry with myself. I thought I've got ahead of myself. Anyway, so it's tough, but let me tell you, I'm so happy now. I feel like I'm living in a brand new house and my life is different because I have a scullery. All right. So don't give up on your rebuild, okay, even when it gets tough. So here's some strategies of the enemy for when you want to give up. And the first strategy of the enemy, because now he's angry, is mocking. And we see this in Nehemiah 2, verse 19. But when the enemies of Judah heard that this man was coming, they laughed at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing that you're doing?" Remember, these people were living like this for 2 generations. The 70 years that they were rebuilding their houses and their temple, and then it was about another 66 years. So for 2 generations they'd been living, so they didn't even know a reality of overcoming. Their whole reality was being open to the enemy's attack. So when they come, they start to mock and laugh. And I wonder if that's happened in your life. No sooner do you make the decision, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go for it. Something happens. A voice within. For me, it's my voices within are sometimes louder than the voices without. My voice, who do you think you are? You're never going to look at so-and-so. They never made it. You're never going to make it. You're no different. Look at what you're doing. You know, you blew it yesterday. You know, this is who you are. And I think about that. I think of the mocking that often comes even from within. You know, I think about the prejudice against Christianity that's pervasive in our society. If you think about the whole entertainment world, I personally see this, mocks Christianity. So that we don't even have to think of a reason to feel like we're idiots for even coming to church, for trying to start getting those stones together. Because you just watch one reel on Instagram and it's somehow, you know, the atheists and the humanists and the scientists, they're all amazing and funny with great personalities and successful with money. And you look at how Christians are portrayed in movies, you know, and we're the idiots, we're delusional, we're weak, we're whatever. So that voice of mocking is in our children, it's in us. It doesn't take much for Satan to just trigger that. Who do you think you are? You're wasting your time. Christianity's a lost cause. Church? I mean, I think about, if, you know, everybody's got something against church. Personally, church saved my life. When I came to Christ 30 years ago, a church reformed me, literally. But I see people, because it's not actually something that's happened personally, it's just pervasive in society. We are mocked. And often all the devil needs to do when you decide to rebuild is to just scratch a little itch that's actually been a little hidden voice inside of you for so long, and you think, oh yeah, you know what, let's go to the boat club. And so they mock instead of coming to church. All right. The second obstacle, the second strategy of opposition that the enemy uses is intimidation. And we see that in the second part of Nehemiah 2, verse 19b, when the enemies say, so they